Hey folks, welcome back to my channel. What we've got for you today is not this. No, today we have part one of an in-frame overhaul on a 4020 John Deere. This starts out as just a head gasket job, finds some more problems, turns into an overhaul. This is fairly technical, this one. It's a little long, it's a little nerdy in some places. So if you're looking for specific information on rebuilding, well, really any diesel engine, you probably want to grab yourself a plate of cookies and a coffee and sit down and enjoy this one for a while. I get into some controversial stuff there with pistons and rings and that kind of thing. I don't want to argue with anybody on any of this stuff, so whatever you put in the comments, just please keep it clean because my kids watch this too. With all that being said, let's get into the video. Well, there it is. We got the old 4020 down to the shop here. So the story on this one is customer called and said he had oil leaking down the side of the motor, and I was there one day, just popped in, looked at it real quick, and it's leaking from between the head and the block. So that's a real common 4020 thing. So we did some pricing, hummed and hawed. He decided, yep, let's do that head job. And so then when the time came to do that, I was there working on some other stuff, and then I went to pull this tractor in the shop, and I walked up to it and I saw that, and I said, oh, that's bad. So that's a weep hole for your cylinder liners. Your liners sit like this in here, and each one has a weep hole, and there's an O-ring on the top and the bottom. You have coolant up here, and the engine oil obviously goes down to the bottom side. So what that weep hole is for is once your top O-ring gets rotten enough, the coolant starts to fill that cavity in between the two O-rings, and it starts to weep out, which is why it's called a weep hole, and that's your signal that your liners are needing to be resealed. The nice thing about that is that you get told that before the coolant winds up down in your oil pan. So then we did some more humming and hawing and pricing, and they decided, yeah, if it needs to be rebuilt, we're going to rebuild it. We're going to keep the tractor around for a while. Perfect. So then I didn't want to rebuild it at their shop because it's just too many hours. You're always waiting on parts and machining, and so it's too many trips back and forth. It's too expensive. So I just rented a trailer, threw it on the old trusty Rusty, and hauled it down here to my shop for him. And so now we're going to tear this thing down, find out what it really needs, and get her freshened up. Well, taking that loader off did not go as planned. I didn't have that set up the way I should have. But the loader's off and tractor's in its new spot. We did a little bit of a tractor shuffle here because this one is going to be down for a few weeks. By the time we get a rebuild kit in and head sent away and machining done and all that stuff, we're going to be a couple of weeks for sure. So this bay is a lot less accessible to get into the way my shop is set up. That white, I really hope to get that white out of here next week. So it's in a little bit easier bay to maneuver around in. This is my tractor. It's been a huge project. It's been in the shop since, well, it's January now, and it's been in the shop since, October, I guess. So just never seem to have time to work on my own stuff. Anyway, I gotta get this one apart because we gotta get that headset off. So I guess we'll tear into that now. I'm getting a few parts off and on the shelf. So the back two bolts on the exhaust manifold were both loose, so that's great. The coolant looks like mud, so that seems fine. Guess we'll keep chugging. Alright, well this weekend I had a couple of my boys at the shop here. One of them was pulling the head and the pan and one piston on that 4020. The other one was wiring up the lights on our old white here. I wanted to talk about this motor a little bit. The customer who owns this tractor, he's had it for many, many years. It's been a good tractor. Haven't had to do a lot of work to it. Remember, it was leaking oil on the other side there past the head gasket, which is actually a common thing on the 4020s. They do that. Now this engine, before he bought it, was supposed to have been rebuilt, and he told me the outfit that did it. I've done work for them as well. I know them pretty well. I was pretty surprised to find that these are actually John Deere pistons in here. That's a John Deere part number. That surprised me. These guys that would have done the rebuild, it would be far more typical for them to have put a Reliance kit or an A&I kit in, so I thought that was interesting. But looking at this head, when we pulled it off, the intake and the exhaust ports are all just full of oil. So the guide seals are obviously worn. The intake valves, just to look at them, and the exhaust valves too, they look all like they're pretty sunk in. This tractor smoked, blew quite a bit. Started okay, and had a fair bit of blow-by. Anyway, so I know the head has definitely got some time on it, needs to be fixed. But when I look at this, those marks on there would be consistent with a roll-lock disc. So I am 99% sure that if this motor was rebuilt, for one, I'm surprised it's got John Deere pistons in it, but this head was not sent in. It wasn't surfaced or anything. Otherwise you wouldn't have those marks like that. It would have different machine marks on it. So that's probably why it was leaking oil out of here after it had been rebuilt. I mean, like I say, it's many years ago, even though the tractor doesn't have that many hours on it since then, but it's really important to get your head gone through when you take them off. I don't even warranty an engine job at all if they won't let me send the head in and get it gone through properly. There's just too many things like this that can pop up later, and I know it lasted for many years, but, well, let me show you. Got one piston out, and you can see the crosshatch in there. There's tons of crosshatch. This engine is far from wore out. So we shouldn't be having to pull the head to do a major repair like that already. I would submit to you that if that head had gotten done then, we wouldn't be spending this money now. I haven't looked real close here yet, but the piston looks great. Looks like it's in very nice shape. The rings, I believe, are okay. They don't feel like they're real sharp. They're definitely not wore out. I think the blow-by was simply a product of the fact that that tractor is more or less a yard tractor and it just kind of putters around, doesn't do a whole lot. Guys, if you have a tractor like this, you got to get that thing hooked up on something where you can work it hard every once in a while and get that engine hot. That's what gets the soot out of your rings. If you don't get that soot out of those rings, then what winds up happening is they wind up sticking in the ring lands and they don't expand properly and then they don't seal properly. There's lots of gook in here. These rings are pretty tight, so that's not a good thing. But that's just a product of the tractor not getting used hard enough. And then as far as rebuilding or not rebuilding or whatever, blah, 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 we got this issue that we got to deal with as well. That remains to be seen. We'll see what happens. All I know at this point is what I know. The rest I don't know yet. Whew, well, we finally got all these sleeves out of here. That was a nightmare. Took me all afternoon to get number 2 out. That thing was in there. I was using this puller. I always borrow this from a mechanic friend of mine. We use these plates on there. They fit into the bottom of the sleeve and catch, and then you just pull them out with that. But I kept on breaking the pivot bolts here. And then I remade the end of this because the bolt holes were oblong, so it was bending the bolts and they were breaking. So I remade that all. So then the bolt wasn't breaking anymore. Then I ripped off the ears. So I welded the ears all together more. And then I started bending the plates in half. Man, just craziness. Anywho, we got that all out of there, so... Look at the mess inside this thing. Look at the sludge in there. That's the coolant. This thing is a giant mess. I got a pile of work to do. Oh, man. Cleaning. Do you see that pipe there? The reason why that pipe is there is because in order to get those sleeves out, I had to jack up on the bottom of the plate. Well, I was using this one. I had to jack up on the bottom of the plate while pulling it with the puller. Otherwise, it just kept on breaking stuff. Those things were in there so hard. And number 6 sleeve is broken. And that is not a fresh break. It's all black and rusty, so that's been busted for a long time. Actually, on the camera, it kind of looks like it is a fresh break, but if I turn the light off there, now you can see it's black. These cylinders are pretty rusty and pitted. Pretty bad one right there. So I'm going to clean these all up and see what they look like after that. But at this point, I'm not convinced that this tractor got the rebuilt engine that it was supposed to have had. The bearings are all pretty, it's hard to tell again on the camera, but they're all pretty scraped up. I had some clean ones here. That one's not too bad, but you can see some wear spots like this all over the place. They're definitely in need of replacement. That one's pretty bad. So I guess I'm gonna hit this block with some solvent, try and clean it up, make a big mess everywhere. Then I get the top kind of cleaned up and dried off a little bit, and get down into the bottom here and get all that scummy junk out so I can start getting an idea of what I gotta do to clean this up here. It's a lot easier to clean when it's dry anyway. Whoa! 4020 parts showed up. Got the Reliance Hyper-Formance kit. That's a good piston. These are good kits. I've put a few of them in. These tractors run really good with a higher compression piston, so looking forward to that. There, I just finished the bearing roll in this 4020. I think bearing rolls are probably my favorite engine job. No, definitely not. I'm just trying to think positive. These are the bearings that I took out of there. And these are not what bearings look like on a low-houred engine. So it's just more indication that this engine was not rebuilt, which is okay. It's fine that it wasn't rebuilt. It just bugs me that it was sold as being a rebuilt engine. That's ridiculous. Alright, well, we got this all cleaned up here. I made an awful mess of this engine, cleaning all that scum out of there, and of course it all drops down on top of the crank, and so I had a huge amount of work to do to clean that crank up. I rolled in the new bearings, that's done. I had cleaned up the deck and tapped all these bolt holes again. It's been a while since I've been on this project, so I gotta get back at it here, but now it's time to pop the liners in, do some test fitting there, make sure that our protrusion is good, and get this engine going. Okay, I'm gonna get into a controversial subject again. Imagine that. So I got these Reliance liner kits. These are Reliance Fac-Pak cylinder kit, Hyper-Formance Fac-Pak. That just means that the piston is already assembled in the liner. These are the ones I like to put in because they give a little bit higher compression. Starts easier, runs a little nicer, a little less smoke, all that kind of stuff. Probably a little bit more power. So I don't know what happened with these boxes here, but some of them are pretty beat up. Like, this one's got a big rip in it. This one's got a big rip in it. This one's pretty much opened already. No, it is opened already. That's great. There we go, all unpacked. We got our liner packings for at the bottom of the cylinder, down in here, and we got our pistons in there. Hyper-Formance. This is Pistons. You can see the offset bowl there. So if you didn't know already, that's your first clue that it matters which way those pistons are going to be installed. And that actually goes with all pistons. They all are to be installed a certain way. But anyways, next step here, I got to test fit these liners, which is a very annoying job when those pistons are in the sleeves like that. So the first thing I got to do now is get the pistons out of there. What? What'd you say? What? What? I can't hear you. Alright, pistons are coming out. You do want to be careful when you do this, and if you can, pull them out the top, because the top of the sleeve is chamfered better than what the bottom is. You don't want sharp corners wrecking those rings. Okay, that one's out. Ah, sorry, I didn't quite hear you in time telling me not to take these apart. Oh, what's that? Oh, they're pre-assembled at the factory and I'm not supposed to touch them. Okay, I see. Yeah, alright. All joking aside, this is where we get into some of that controversial stuff. I've been doing this a long time, and one thing that I've learned is you can't trust anybody. These factory pre-installed kits, I haven't come across this myself, but I've heard of them being installed with rings upside down from guys that pull these apart and actually check them. And listen, these are installed by people, like in a factory. Quite often it's probably, you know, some high school dropout or, you know, somebody that doesn't really care. They're just there for a check. So you want to be careful with stuff like this. If anything happens to this engine, it's my problem because I'm supplying these parts. So I need to make very sure that things are up to my specs because I'm the guy that's got to warranty this. So I take them apart, I take the rings off, I check the gaps, all that kind of stuff. A lot of people think that the ring gaps are precisely set for the liners. That's not true. The ring gaps, no factory goes through and sets all your ring gaps perfectly. What they do is they throw the ring in, they check to make sure that they're within spec, which is a very large spec, as we've talked about before and as I've shown you before, and that's it. That's all you get. So you install those things the way they're installed from the factory, it will work. But it could be better. So let's talk about that a little bit. Right off the bat, one thing I notice is, you see here, those scratches? Those are tooling scratches. That one there is from moving in the piston. That's a tooling scratch. It's just proof that it's just people that assemble these. Mistakes can be made. There was another one here I saw that this one's got some kind of scratches there. No, not a big deal. I'm just saying these are assembled by people and people make mistakes. So we got our top ring here. That one's installed correctly. Bottom ring or intermediate ring right there. The camera doesn't want to focus there, but that is installed correctly. And then we have our oil ring. It can be either way. That one doesn't matter. Same thing here. That one's right. Over here, yeah, that one's right. Oop, I didn't even get you in the frame there. The right there is where it's marked. It's good. Top ring is good. Bottom ring. Where's my gap here? Oh, there we go. I keep calling it the bottom ring. It's the intermediate. It's the middle ring. That one's installed right. You can see the... Oh, let me get some light here for you. There. You can see the markings there. That one's up. These ones are marked, so it's really easy to tell. That one's right. 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 Okay, good. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the ring orientation, or clocking as they would call it. So, I have all of these pistons so that the front is facing my right. There, there, and there. And you will notice that the ring clocking is different on every piston. And that's fine. That's not a big deal. But I do see a fairly significant issue here. The ring gaps are all about 120 degrees apart. That's perfect. That's about what we want to see. Now, when it comes to the actual clocking though, most of these piston manufacturers refer you to the service manual. I'll save you the time for reading all of this. This is the factory service manual for the 4020. But what I want to point out here is, as far as clocking, it says stagger ring gaps on pistons before installing them in the cylinder bores, and then it goes on to other things. It doesn't tell you exactly where those rings should line up, those ring gaps, where they should line up. Now, from my experience, most engine manufacturers will give you a little chart that shows you that those rings need to be lined up in a very specific way, like this. This is the chart, or something very similar to this is usually what you see in your factory service manuals. And notice here how they want your ring gaps staggered from the center line where the wrist pin is. They do not want you to have those ring gaps lined up at the wrist pin. There's a lot of controversy over that, about rings turning on the piston while the engine is running and all that kind of stuff. You know, some people say that these rings are rotating at 60 revolutions per minute while the engine is running at full throttle, which is maybe in a performance application, but that's totally bogus in this kind of an application. And the reason why I say that is 60 RPM without some sort of lubrication or bearing surface in here, these piston rings would eat that groove out so fast, especially the top ring. Like, there's not a lot of lube in here. That ring may move, but it ain't going 60 RPM, I'll tell you that. Anyway, that's my own opinion. I don't have anything to back that up, but that's what I'm noticing here is right there, we got a ring gap that lines up with the piston pin. Not on my engines. You can do that on yours, not on my engines. Got another one here, lines up with the piston pin. No, that's a no-no. This one here is a little bit too close. Probably would be okay, it's a little bit too close. So why? Why does that matter? Well, I don't have an exact scientific explanation for that. I don't know everything, but from what I gather, it would have to do with the fact that every time that piston goes up to top dead center and the rod changes direction, the piston rocks and then comes back down. And where does it rock? It rocks right on that pin. So you don't want your ring gap lined up where the piston is rocking. Like in a situation like this where these edges are in line with where it rocks, it just gives a greater chance for those edges of the ring gap to score that cylinder lining and make a mess. When you get to this side, by the time it's rocking, it's not so much rocking as it is moving up and down because of the leverage from your pin to the end of the piston. So it's definitely safer to have it on the other side of your pivot point, I guess you could say. So this doesn't fly with me. I don't like that. That's not the way I do my engines. I know a lot of people will argue that and say, oh, I've done it this way for 457 years and I've never had a problem, and I've done 18,000 engines and all this kind of stuff, and that's great. Neither have I ever had a problem. I don't do it that way. Manufacturers 9 out of 10 times tell you not to put that ring gap over top of the piston pin. Lots of forums tell you it's fine. Well, who are you going to believe? Joe Blow spouting his mind off on a forum, or the engineers that design and test and build this stuff? You know, you got to choose. It's up to you. I'm not a final authority on this. I'm just sharing what my experience and what I know and what I believe. Okay, so that's why I take them apart. Now let's address why they're pre-assembled that way. There's all kinds of thought processes on that. Some guys say they're pre-assembled because you can't be trusted to install those piston rings without breaking them or scratching them or screwing something up. Could be true. Well, let's see what Reliance says about it. I happen to have the paperwork right here. Pistons have been installed in the cylinder liners to reduce the possibility of the piston ring damage during shipping. So that's what Reliance says about their kits. They installed that piston in there so it wouldn't get damaged during shipping. That tells me that we probably should be taking this apart and just double checking that everything is correct. What do you think? Alright, enough of that. I gotta get this job done. So I'm gonna wipe these all down a little bit now with a dry cloth, clean cloth, and throw the liners in, test fit them, see where we wind up with that. Such a satisfying sound. Nice. Okay, let's see what that protrusion says now. So unfortunately, I only have like 2-inch long bolts to hold these liners down. And 2 inches is way too long. And I don't have enough spacers to shorten them up, so I'll have to swap bolts around all the way down the block. These are 9/16 head bolts, which is not a common size for bolts. Nobody carries 9/16 much. So I'll just have to deal with it for today. Fourth out. You have to hold your liners down with bolts if you want to get an accurate number on protrusion. Well, that was interesting. Book says liner height is 1 to 4 thou. Says it down here. When the wear in the cylinder liner at its greatest point exceeds 5 thou, replace the liner. Use a file to remove any burrs from the top of the cylinder block, and use a dial indicator to check the height of the flange on the liner in relation to the cylinder block. The top of the flange should be from 1 to 4 thou higher than the cylinder block. 1 to 4 thou. So here's my chart. We got a bunch of these that are 5 thou, 5 thou, 5 thou, 4.5. This one's 5.5, 4.9. There's a visual representation of what those liners look like in the cylinder block. So what that tells me is that block is probably not straight. It's not flat. Now it's true, I had not thrown my straight edge on here yet. If that head is flat, you take your flashlight and you throw it in behind there, you should not see much at all for light all the way across there. So it should look like this. Like, see, my light is on, but you can't see any light coming through there. Now if I work my way along, all of a sudden you can see a bit of light. That was a bolt hole right here, so that doesn't count. Or coolant plaster, sorry. There you can see some. Quite a bit showing there. The camera doesn't really do justice here in this case, but there's actually quite a bit of light shining through in places here. Every time you see that big spotlight, that's where it's going into a bit of a, you know, one of those holes there, so that doesn't count. But we are seeing a lot of light through there, so that head is not very flat. It's not bad enough, like you can't get a feeler gauge in there, so it's not horrible. And I mean, even when we're looking at the chart, you know, we're dealing with thousandths of an inch, like less than a sheet of paper, so it's not much, right? What is going on over there? So if we look here, there's a ton of light coming through underneath on that bridge. Same there. This one's got tons of light too. This one's really down. So yeah, this block is not straight. Alright, there you have it. So to do this right, we actually need to pull this block out, finish tearing it down, rip the crank out of there and send it off to get planed, get the top surfaced, and get the counterbores recut. But I talked to the customer about it, and that is a lot of work, adds a lot of expense to this job. And for the purpose of this tractor, doesn't really make sense. As well as there was no issues with this engine at all, outside of the fact that on this side of the engine it was leaking oil all down here from the head gasket, which is a common 40-20 thing. That probably was happening because that block is not even. Regardless, we're not gonna go through and tear the whole thing apart. We are gonna put it back together the way it is. I'm going to put some copper coat or something like that, some kind of sealant on that head gasket to help it seal. And otherwise it was running fine, it was working fine, it was starting fine, so we're just going to run it the way it is. This tractor is not going to go to the field and cultivate for days on end like it used to, so we're just going to make it work. You know, for checking flatness on these, if you don't have a calibrated straight edge, those things are pretty expensive. If you have a long file that you can throw on there, take that file and just give her a couple of scrapes all the way across, and that'll show you pretty quick if you have high spots or low spots. And if it's a used engine that hasn't been surfaced, yeah, it's going to have them. But it'll show you how bad they are. Or another thing you can do is you take a 2x4, wrap a sheet of sandpaper on your 2x4, and then just rub that back and forth a few times across here, keeping it nice and flat. And that will do the same thing. It'll show you, the marks will show you pretty quick where your high and low spots are, and as well as to some extent how bad they are. But on this one, we're not going to do that. I already know that our block is not straight. It's not horrible, but it's not great. For now, we're just going to pull these liners back out, get the packings in there, make sure the deck is nice and clean, and the counterbores are nice and clean. We'll drop those liners in for the final installation, and then we can start working at the pistons and rings. For the last 6 minutes when you weren't looking, I was installing liner O-rings. Book says, also clean O-ring grooves in block before placing the O-rings in position, making sure that they are neither twisted nor cramped. Red O-ring goes in the lower groove and black O-ring in the upper groove. Now this is the factory John Deere manual. Then if we come over here to my Hyper-Formance cylinder kits, we go down here to these bags had my liner O-rings, and it says install the enclosed cylinder liner O-rings in the following location. Red O-ring installed in the top groove of the block. Black O-ring installed in the lower groove of the block. No, the red O-ring goes in the lower groove and the black O-ring in the upper groove. Alright, so who are you going to listen to? When there's a contradiction like that in the service manual, the factory service manual, and your parts kit, you always go with the instructions in the parts kit. because those instructions match the specific parts that you're getting. These are not John Deere parts, therefore they are going to be a little different than the actual John Deere stuff. So we'll go ahead and do it the way the instructions say. I mean, I went ahead and did it the way the instructions say. So the red O-ring is on top, the black one's on the bottom. I mean, really important that a guy makes sure that those are not twisted. They got to be sitting in there nice and relaxed. Otherwise what happens is when you slide that liner down in there, once the bottom chamfer grabs those O-rings, it'll just squish them right out of there. Ask me how I know. No, don't. Please don't. Okay, just had to run out for a quick service call there. I had a customer that, with a Kenworth semi-truck, they had a Pack-R in it, and they took the Pack-R out, they put this X15 in there, ISX Cummins. So with the new harness and everything, they were having some issues with the accelerator pedal. They weren't getting any signal back to the ECM on that, so just had to throw the scanner on there and see what was going on. So I think we got that taken care of now. So, now, back to my liner O-rings. Oh no, I did that already. Oh no, that means we're doing liners now. Okay, back to liners. That's the problem with being a breakdown guy. Seems like every call pretty much is an emergency. You gotta take off and rip over somewhere else, and then stuff like this that's not an emergency just takes forever to get it done. So, what are we doing here? I'm gonna clean these liners up, get them soaped up and dropped in place. Alright, I got my liners all cleaned up, ready to go in. It seals the coolant on that flange right there. If we go over here, that flange sits right there in the counterbores. And these counterbores are a little bit beat up. You can see how it's really not that smooth there. That's not going to give a very good seal. The firing on top and the gasket also seals that if it does sneak past there. So you're not really required to put any sealant around those flanges when you put these together. But just because these counterbores, I already know they're wore at an angle from doing my cylinder protrusion. So I think I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of flange sealant on here just to help it have a 100% chance of sealing properly. When you're using flange sealant on these, you want to be very Mennonite with it. What I mean by that is very sparing. You want it to last. You want your bottle to last a long time. Really the idea here is you just want to fill in the low spots. You don't really want to add anything for that flange to sit on top of while it's in here and hold it up. That's not the idea at all. You just want to fill in the low spots so that you have a little bit better chance of it properly sealing. This is anaerobic sealant that I'm using here, so it's not going to dry until the liner is in and gets the air away from it. Okay. Well, different people do things different ways. I like the liner soap. That's what I use for doing this. Right now I'm just going to soak up my O-rings. I think I said soak up. I meant soap up. Soap. Soap. Then I want to rub some of that on my liner as well on the bottom here, so that when it goes in, it's going to be nice and slippy. Just like that. And we just want to kind of work it in. Boom. That's it right there. And we're going to go ahead and throw a bolt in. Help hold it down. Okay, remember next. Lube these up really good. There, that one's dropped in. Just kind of give them a gentle wiggle and then press them down in there. These engines do not have press fit liners, even though they can come out awfully hard. They're not actually pressed in there. Forgot to put my bolts in. Oops, that's the wrong spot. Goofball. It's a little bit tough to get in here the way this SCV stack is. I think I'm going to need a piece of wood on that one. I just can't quite get my weight on this the way I need to, so I'm going to have to use a block of wood here to help get on that liner. Come on, little buddy. It's going down, but man, is it stubborn. There we go. I can't get on top of it properly because this stuff is all in the way here. Okay, save the hardest one for last. Well, this O-ring is not in, or else I just pulled it out. What happened here? Can't get my arm in there because that SCV's in the way again. This is where doing these on the engine stand is just so much nicer. You got all the room in the world to work then. Huh, I cannot get that on there. Okay, let's try again. These top O-rings are super flimsy, so go. Perfect. Alright, those are all tight. Crawled underneath there and checked to make sure I didn't have any O-ring protruding anywhere. I make sure I didn't shear them off. Looks all good, so now I'm going to throw my top rings in and we'll see what the gap is like.